We throw around this term human nature all the time, right? We kind of assume that deep down there's a single, universal way that all our minds work. But what if that's not true? What if the culture you grow up in does more than just give you certain beliefs? What if it actually changes the very hardware of your mind?
Let's take something super basic, something we all think is universal. Laughter, a sense of humor. We all laugh. It feels like one of those things that should just work, anywhere, for anyone. But, let's actually put that idea to the test.
So check this out. In the US, the show Seinfeld was more than a hit. It was a cultural landmark. TV Guide even called it the greatest show of all time. But then they tried to export it to Germany. And it was a total flop. It just tanked. Most Germans just plain didn't find it funny. It's a perfect little example of how even humor isn't a given. It's deeply, deeply tied to our cultural context.
All right, so for the longest time, the field of psychology pretty much ran on one big assumption. The idea was that the human mind is like a computer CPU, a central processing unit. It's this universal piece of hardware, and it works the same way for everybody, no matter where you are in the world. Culture, in this view, is just the software that runs on the hardware. It doesn't actually change the machine itself.
But then, this really cool field called cultural psychology comes along and just flips that whole idea on its head. It asks the big question: what if the software and the hardware can't be separated? What if our experiences, our culture, the software, doesn't just run on the mind, but actually rewires it? That's the mind-bending idea we're digging into today, that our minds and our cultures literally create each other.
Okay, so where do we even begin with something this big? Well, let's start with the most fundamental question there is. Who are you? How do you even begin to define yourself? Turns out, your culture has a whole lot to do with the answer.
It turns out research points to two really different ways of thinking about who we are. In a lot of Western cultures, the focus is on what's called the independent self. The idea is that your identity comes from the inside, your personality, your unique skills, your ambitions. These things are stable, and the cultural motto is kinda, be unique. On the other hand, in many East Asian and other cultures, the focus is more on the interdependent self. Here, your identity is all about your relationships. Who you are is defined by being a son, a teammate, a friend. The self is more fluid, it changes with the situation, and the goal is to belong.
And get this. This isn't just some abstract philosophical thing. It literally shows up in our brain scans. An fMRI study found that when Chinese participants thought about their mothers, the exact same part of their brain lit up as when they thought about themselves. For Western participants, though, those were two different thoughts in two different brain regions. It's wild. It means for an interdependent self, your mom isn't just someone you're close to. She is, neurologically, a part of you.
Okay, so culture shapes who we think we are. But it gets even crazier. It can actually change how we literally see the world.
All right, time for a quick pop quiz for you. Take a look at this target flower down here. Now, does it belong with the flowers in group 1 or the flowers in group 2? Go ahead, just take a second and pick one.
So, what'd you go with? If you picked group 2, you are probably using what psychologists call analytic thinking. You found a clear rule. The target flower has a straight stem, just like all the flowers in group 2. That way of thinking, focusing on objects and categories and rules, is pretty common in Western cultures. Now, if you picked group 1, you were likely using holistic thinking. You didn't find one single rule, but you just saw this overall family resemblance. The target flower just feels like it fits better with group 1. This way of thinking, focusing on relationships and the bigger picture, is more common in East Asian cultures. The amazing part is, neither answer is wrong. They're just two different and equally valid ways of seeing.
All of this leads to a pretty huge question, right? How? How do we learn to think in such different ways? Where do these invisible cultural rulebooks even come from?
To get our heads around this, let's dive into a really dramatic story from history. In 1845, the Franklin expedition set sail. We're talking two state-of-the-art ships, 128 British men on a mission to find the legendary Northwest Passage. They were the best of the best, with the best gear. And they sailed off and vanished. But here's the thing. That exact same hostile environment that swallowed up 128 of Britain's finest, it was home. It was home to the Nesolek Inuit, who had been living and thriving there for thousands of years, using tools they made from what was around them.
So what gives? The environment was the same. The basic human biology was the same. Why did one group thrive while the other met with disaster?
The answer, in 2 words, is transmitted culture. Think about it. The Netsilik Inuit had this enormous, non-physical toolkit, a massive library of information built up over centuries: how to build a shelter, where to find food, what you can and can't eat, how to make the right clothes, all of it passed down from person to person. The Franklin expedition? They had none of that. Their survival depended on a library of knowledge they didn't even know existed.
So this story really helps us break down the 2 main ways culture comes about. On one hand, you have evoked culture. This is when the environment itself kind of triggers certain behaviors. For example, research shows that really harsh environments often evoke cultures that put a huge emphasis on toughness and masculinity. But then you have transmitted culture, like the Inuit survival skills. This is all the stuff we learn from other people. And it's this massive shared brain of transmitted culture that's allowed us humans to adapt and live in almost every corner of the planet.
All right, this is all fascinating stuff, right? But what does it mean for us, today, in the real world? Why does any of this matter right now?
Well, look around. We live in a world where we're constantly bumping up against people from different backgrounds. And this brings up a real debate. What's the best way to get along? Do we go with a colorblind approach, where we try to ignore all our differences and just focus on being human? Or do we take a different path, one where we actually acknowledge and even celebrate those differences?
Well, it turns out the research is pretty clear on this one. Study after study shows that a multicultural approach, one that recognizes that these cultural differences are real and valuable, actually leads to more positive feelings and better interactions between different groups. Trying to pretend these deep-seated differences don't exist just isn't as effective as facing them head-on.
Now, there's a huge but here, and it's super important. We have to be really careful. As Stephen Hine, the author whose work we're drawing on, makes crystal clear, none of this is about putting people in boxes. These are just average tendencies across massive groups of people. Within any culture, there is a huge, enormous amount of individual variation. Knowing where someone's from doesn't give you a magic key to their mind. It's a tendency, not a blueprint.
And that really is the biggest takeaway here. The point of all this isn't to stereotype people, it's to start seeing the cultural water that we're all swimming in. So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. What truths that you take for granted, the things you think are just obvious, which of those might actually just be your culture talking?